She had a way of standing at a window that I have never seen in another person. Not looking out, that is too simple a word for it. She would place one hand flat against the glass, not pressing, just resting it there, as though she was taking the temperature of the world outside without committing to enter it. Her fingers were long. The middle finger of her left hand had a small raised scar across the second knuckle from a canning jar that broke in the summer of, I believe, 1873. I know the year because it was the summer my youngest brother came home from Columbus and we were all together for the last time. And she cut her hand on the broken glass and wrapped it in her apron and did not stop working. I have been watching for that gesture, the hand flat against the glass, the fingers just resting in every woman I have known since. I have never seen it again, not once in 46 years of looking. I am going to tell you about the grave first, because the grave is the part I have been keeping, and I am 78 years old, and the keeping is getting heavier. But you will not understand the grave until you understand her. And I find, now that I am sitting here attempting to begin, that I do not know how to explain her without starting with the window. So I have started with the window. We will get to the grave in time. We will get to everything in time. My name is Eleanor Ruth Marsh, born the 2nd of January, 1849 in Coshocton County, Ohio. I am dictating this to my granddaughter Alice, who is writing it down in the composition book she uses for her schoolwork, and who has been told that she may read what she is writing only after I am finished speaking. Alice is 17, and she is patient in the way that young people are patient when they sense that something significant is being asked of them. I am grateful to her. I want that noted before anything else is noted. The grave is at the eastern edge of Elmwood County Cemetery, which sits 2 miles outside the town of Newcomerstown on the road toward Coshocton. If you walk through the main gate and go left along the gravel path past the veterans section and the Methodist families and the 3 tall oaks that were already old when I was a girl, you will come eventually to a low iron fence, more decorative than functional, with a gate that has not latched properly since at least 1910. Beyond that fence, the ground changes. The grass is kept, because I have kept it. But there are no stones, there are no names, there are no dates carved anywhere. There is only the earth and what is in it, and what I have brought to it every Sunday that I have been physically capable of making the journey for 50 years. 50 years this past April. I have told my husband I visit my mother's grave on Sunday afternoons. My mother is buried in the Methodist section under a proper stone with her name and her dates and a verse from the Psalms that she selected herself in 1881, the year before she died, with the particular forward planning practicality that defined everything she did. My mother's grave I visit perhaps twice a year, in spring and at Christmas. Every other Sunday, for 50 years, I have walked past my mother's grave and continued to the eastern edge of the ground and stood or sat or, in the early years, when my knees permitted it, knelt at a plot of earth that has no marker and no name and no official record of who it holds. Nobody has ever followed me. I have checked. I want to be precise about the geography of the section beyond the iron fence, because precision is the only courtesy I can offer at this distance. The unconsecrated ground at Elmwood runs perhaps 40 yards east to west and 20 yards deep from the fence line. When I first began visiting in the spring of 1882, there were 11 other plots in that section, most of them unmarked, a few with rough wooden stakes that have long since rotted into nothing. I do not know who most of those people were. I know one of them was a man named Carver, who drank himself to death in the winter of 1878, and whose family would not claim the body, and I know this only because my father mentioned it once at supper as an example of something. I cannot now remember what moral lesson he intended, only that the name Carver caught in my memory and stayed there. Names do that to me. They catch. The plot I visit is in the northeast corner of the section, where the ground rises slightly before it meets the fence. It is the highest point of that ground, which matters to me for reasons I could not fully explain if pressed, except to say that when I chose it, when I had any say in the choosing, which was limited, I wanted her to be above the water table. The soil in that part of the county is clay-heavy and holds water in wet seasons. I wanted her above it. I bring flowers when the season allows. Wild ones, mostly I have never brought anything purchased, because purchased flowers require an explanation when you carry them through town, and I have spent 50 years constructing a life that requires as few explanations as possible. In winter, I bring nothing, or sometimes a sprig of something evergreen from the hedgerow along our lane, tucked inside my coat where it cannot be seen. I stand. I talk. Sometimes. I have talked quite a lot over 50 years to a rectangle of earth in the northeast corner of a field that official Presbyterianism has determined is outside the boundary of God's particular attention. I have never found that determination convincing. I should tell you how the burial came to happen the way it did, which means I have to tell you about Reverend Flood, who was the minister of First Presbyterian Church of Newcomerstown from 1874 to 1901, and who was in every external respect a decent and well-intentioned man, and in this one respect was the most immovable object I have ever placed myself against. The Presbyterian Church's position on self-destruction in 1882 was not ambiguous. It was not a matter of pastoral discretion or congregational vote. A person who died by their own hand died outside the covenant, and the churchyard was consecrated ground, and the two things could not occupy the same space. Reverend Flood did not make this rule. He did not enjoy applying it. I believe in the part of my thinking that has tried hardest to be fair to him over 50 years, that he genuinely grieved what he was required to do. He was still required to do it, and he did it. The county had a procedure for such cases. The body would be released to the family if family claimed it, and buried in the unconsecrated section of Elmwood, and no service would be read over it, and the county record would list the cause of death as it listed the cause, which it did, plainly, without softening, in the clerk's careful hand in the ledger that I have read once and do not intend to read again. There was no family to claim her. That was the first problem. The second problem was that the person most likely to claim her could not claim her without explaining how she came to know her well enough to claim her, and that explanation would have produced consequences that I was not, at 33 years old, prepared to face. I am prepared to face them now. Hence this dictation, hence Alice's composition book. Her name and I have been holding it for 3 paragraphs, which I recognize and which has been deliberate because I wanted you to know the window first and the hand against the glass and the scar on her knuckle before the name had any chance to flatten her into a fact. Her name was Vivienne Cook. She was 31 years old. She had been in Newcomerstown for 4 years, having come from somewhere in western Pennsylvania that she referred to only as near Pittsburgh, with a vagueness that I understood eventually as purposeful. She taught music, piano, and voice to the daughters of families in the county who could afford the luxury, which in 1878 was fewer families than it had been before the Depression years, but enough to keep her in the rented rooms above Hatcher's dry goods store on Main Street, which she made into the most particular and organized small space I have ever entered. She had a list on the inside of the kitchen cupboard door. Not a shopping list, a list of things she intended to do that month. Small things. Learn the German word for a particular kind of light. Write a letter to someone she called only R. In the letter I once saw her begin and never saw her finish. Read the 3rd volume of something she had read the first 2 volumes of in Pennsylvania. The list was written in her careful script and crossed off item by item as she accomplished each one. She crossed items off lists. She planned months in advance. She had a student who showed particular promise, a girl named Harriet Bowl, whose parents had agreed to let her continue lessons through the following spring. She had ordered a new piece of sheet music from a publisher in Cleveland that had not yet arrived. I tell you these things because I have needed someone to know them for 50 years, and because I have found in the long practice of grief that the details are where the person lives longest. The dates and the causes go in ledgers. The list on the inside of the cupboard door goes somewhere else, somewhere without a name, and that is where I have been keeping her. The grave is the address, but she is not only there. I will tell you how I knew her. I will tell you what the knowing cost. I will tell you about the Sunday in April of 1882 when everything became what it has been since. But first I want to sit with her name for one moment in this dictation. In Alice's composition book, in whatever permanence this eventually becomes. Vivienne Cook, 31 years old, a scar on her left hand, a list on the inside of a cupboard door. She deserved a stone. She deserved her name cut into something that lasts. I could not give her that. I gave her 50 years of Sunday afternoons and flowers when the season allowed. And this, whatever this is, I hope it is enough. I have never been certain that it is. The sheet music from Cleveland arrived 3 weeks after she died. I still have it. I have been thinking, since I began this dictation yesterday, about the word new. People have said, in the careful oblique way that people in small Ohio towns say things they mean more directly. That I knew Vivienne Cook. As a fact of social geography, this is accurate. Newcomerstown in 1878 was not a large place. Everybody knew everybody in the sense of knowing their name, their family connection, their professional standing, their church attendance, their general reputation. This kind of knowing requires no intimacy. It is simply the tax you pay for living in close proximity to the same several hundred people for the duration of a life. That is not how I knew her. I knew the smell of the rooms above Hatcher's dry goods store, which was wood polish and a particular brand of coal that burned slightly sulfurous, and the faint, persistent sweetness of the rosin she used on her violin bow, which she played privately and rarely, and which I did not know she played at all until I had been visiting those rooms for nearly a year. I knew the sound the third stair made a low, flat complaint, like something that had accepted its situation but wished it noted, and I knew to step to the left of it when I did not want my arrival announced before I was ready to announce it. I knew that she took her coffee with nothing in it, and that she considered this a point of minor pride, and that she would occasionally comment on other people's use of sugar with an expression of gentle bafflement that made me want to laugh every time. This is a different kind of knowing. I want the distinction made before we go further. I met her in September of 1878. I was 29 years old. I had been married to George Marsh for 6 years. George is. He lived until 1921, a man of consistent character and limited imagination, which I mean neither as cruelty nor as complaint, only as description. He was good to me. He worked his father's grain operation with the steady, unromantic diligence that the work required, and he came home at regular hours, and he had opinions about the weather and the price of grain and the general direction of the county's politics that he expressed at supper with the regularity of a man reading from a prepared text. I do not say this to diminish him. I say it because you need to understand the particular quality of quiet that existed inside my marriage before September of 1878, so that you can understand what it meant when that quiet was interrupted. My daughter Clara had expressed an interest in learning piano. She was 8 years old, and the interest may well have been an 8-year-old's passing enthusiasm rather than genuine aptitude. It was, in fact, a passing enthusiasm. She abandoned it within 18 months. But in September of 1878, I walked her up the stairs, above Hatcher's dry goods store, past the third step, and knocked on the door of Vivienne Cook's rooms, and the door opened. Clara took her lesson. I sat in the small outer room on a chair that Vivienne kept there for waiting parents, which was upholstered in a green fabric that had worn thin at the armrest, and I listened to my daughter pick out scales on the other side of a not very thick wall, and I looked at the room I was sitting in. It was extraordinary to me, not because it was lavish, it was not. The furnishings were modest and clearly assembled from what was available and affordable, but every object in it had been placed with intention. There was a small shelf of books, arranged not by size, but by some organizing principle I could not immediately determine. There was a print on the wall, a landscape, European-looking, a river, and some hills in a frame that was slightly too large for it. The excess border, filled with a thin paper mat that she had cut and fitted herself precisely. There was a ceramic pitcher on the windowsill with 3 dried stems in it, not flowers, just stems, the flowers long gone. And they were arranged at angles that were clearly considered. I sat in that chair, and I felt something I do not have a clean word for even now, 50 years later, sitting across from Alice and her composition book. Recognition is close. The sudden knowledge that a kind of room you had not known was possible was not only possible, but actual and present, and 20 feet away. Clara's lesson ended. Vivienne came out with her. I stood up. We were introduced properly, though we had, of course, been aware of each other in the general county knowledge way for some time. She looked at me with the direct attention of a person who is actually looking, which is rarer than it sounds. And she said, "Clara has a good ear. Whether she has the patience is a different question, and too early to answer." I said I appreciated her honesty. She said, "I have found it is the only policy that keeps the work interesting." I thought about that sentence for 3 days. I began accompanying Clara to her lessons. This was not unusual. Most mothers did. particularly for young children. What became gradually unusual was the length of time I remained after Clara's lesson concluded, first under the pretext of discussing Clara's progress, then under the thinner pretext of simply visiting, then without pretext at all, because by the spring of 1879, Vivienne and I had arrived at the kind of understanding that does not require pretext, and in fact finds pretext slightly insulting to the intelligence of both parties. We talked. That was the beginning and the long middle of it. I want to be plain about the chronology, because I think chronology matters for honesty. We talked for a very long time before anything else was true between us, and the talking was not innocent in the sense of being unaware of itself. We were both aware of it, but it was also not performance. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had with another person, conducted across the small table in her kitchen over coffee that she drank plain and I drank with a small amount of sugar that she did not comment on after the first time. She had read more than anyone I had known. Not in a way she displayed. She did not quote things at you or use her reading as a demonstration of superiority. She had simply absorbed a great quantity of the world through books and through wherever she had been before Pittsburgh became the vague reference point for her past, and she thought about what she had absorbed with a rigor that was, to me, like watching someone use a tool I had not known existed. She asked me questions. That was the thing. George asked me at supper whether I thought it would rain and what had happened in town and whether Clara had practiced. Vivienne asked me what I thought about things, what I believed, what I had wanted at 20 that I had not pursued, and why. She asked these questions with the genuine forward lean of someone who intended to use the answer, not simply receive it. And I found, this is the part I have never been able to fully explain, I found that I had answers, that there were opinions and desires and entire provinces of thought inside me that had simply been waiting for someone to ask. I had been married for 6 years. I had not known they were there. By the autumn of 1879, Clara's interest in piano had begun its decline. By the winter of 1880, it had concluded. I told George that I had arranged to take the lessons myself, which was partially true. I did resume them for a period as a means of maintaining what had become, by that point, the actual structure of my week. George thought this was a reasonable use of a Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. George thought most things I did were reasonable. It was one of his genuine virtues. And in this period, one of my primary practical advantages, what I am describing, built slowly. I want that said with complete clarity, because I am aware of how these things are narrated in the general imagination as sudden and overwhelming, a kind of weather event that strips everything before it. It was not like that. It was more like the way water moves through clay soil, quietly, without drama, following the path of least resistance, and then, over time, making the path wider. By the time I understood the full shape of what was happening, it had already been happening for the better part of 2 years, and I had made no decision that felt like a decision. Only a long series of afternoons that each felt like the natural continuation of the afternoon before. I am not offering this as exculpation. I am offering it as the accurate description of a process that is almost never accurately described, because the accurate description is less satisfying than the dramatic one. Vivienne had been in Newcomerstown for 4 years before I met her. She had, in those 4 years, established herself as professionally competent and personally private. She was courteous with everyone and intimate with no one, or so it appeared. And appearances in a small county town are not only the public record, but in many respects, the only record that anyone bothers to keep. She had come from near Pittsburgh. I know now, I know because she told me in pieces over the 2 years of our Tuesdays and Thursdays that she had left a situation there that she could not have remained in without disappearing into it entirely. She did not use those words. She used words that were somewhat more practical and considerably less dramatic, but that was the meaning underneath them. She had left something and come to Newcomerstown because it was far enough and small enough, and because a woman who taught piano in a county town asked nothing of you that you were not willing to perform publicly, and the rest of yourself you could keep. I understood this better than she knew I did, possibly better than I knew I did at the time. She had a sister. I will tell you her name when it is time, because the sister is part of what is coming, and I am trying to observe the correct order of things. What I will tell you now is that the sister wrote to her regularly, and that Vivienne wrote back, and that the letters were kept in a box under her bed, the one personal archive she maintained with any sentimentality. Everything else in her life being organized for function rather than memory. She showed me one letter once, not to read. She held it and let me see the handwriting on the outside and said, "She is the person I would have stayed for. I left anyway." I did not ask what she meant. Some sentences you do not ask about. You simply hold them carefully until they become legible. The last time I sat in her kitchen was a Thursday in March of 1882. I know it was the last time, only because of what happened 4 weeks later. At the time, it was simply a Thursday, unremarkable in its general shape: coffee, conversation, the late afternoon light coming through her west window at the low angle. That meant it was time for me to start home before George began to wonder about supper. She was quiet that Thursday in a way that was different from her usual quality of quiet, which was a thinking quiet, a processing quiet. This was something else. I noticed it and I did not press it, because she did not press me on the days when I arrived carrying something I was not ready to put down. And this was an agreement between us that operated without ever having been stated. I put on my coat at the door. She was standing at the window, the hand flat against the glass, the long fingers just resting. I said I would see her Tuesday. She said yes. She said it looking out the window, not at me, and the word was complete. Not dismissive, just complete, the way a sentence is complete when it contains everything it intends to and nothing more. I went home. I made supper. George had opinions about the price of spring wheat. 4 weeks later, she was gone, and I was standing in a room above Hatch's dry goods store, looking at a list on the inside of a cupboard door, and the third item from the bottom was crossed off, and the fourth item would never be crossed off. And the sheet music from Cleveland was sitting on the piano unopened, and I understood for the first time with full and terrible clarity how long I had been looking at a window without seeing the glass. She had written my name in the letterbox under her bed. Not in a letter, just my name, on a separate piece of paper, folded once, placed on top of the other letters. I found it when I went to collect what I could before the landlord cleared the rooms. I have never decided what it means. I have never stopped deciding. I have said that the apparent subject of this dictation is the grave. I want to correct that now, because I have been circling it for 2 chapters with the particular circling motion of a person who knows where the center is and has been building the courage to stand in it. The grave is real. The 50 years of Sunday afternoons are real. Vivienne Cook is real, or was. And the realness of what she was does not diminish because she has been in the ground since April of 1882, and because her name appears in no churchyard in Coshocton County, and because the county clerk's ledger recorded her in the flat, necessary language of official documentation and moved on to the next entry. All of that is real, and none of it is the subject. The subject is what I did in the 4 weeks between the last Thursday and the Sunday in April when I was told what had happened. What I failed to do, what I saw and named as something other than what it was, because naming it correctly would have required me to act, and acting would have required me to become visible, and becoming visible would have cost me everything I had arranged my life to protect. I have been keeping a grave for 50 years. I have also been keeping that. And the grave, at least, has flowers. Let me tell you about the 4 weeks. The Thursday in March was the 23rd. I know this with certainty because I have returned to it so many times that the date has acquired the solidity of a physical object. I can put my hand on it in memory, the way you put your hand on a fence post to test whether it will hold. March the 23rd, 1882. The hand against the glass. The word yes, complete and containing nothing extra. I went home on the 23rd and I thought about her quietness for perhaps 2 days, carrying it the way you carry a stone in your shoe, aware of it, uncomfortable, but not yet at the point of stopping to remove it. By the 3rd day, I had largely set it aside because life in a household does not pause for the stones in your shoes, and because I had Clara's schooling to attend to and the spring cleaning that George expected to begin in the first week of April, and a letter to write to my sister in Zanesville that I had been postponing for a month. I did not go to see her on the following Tuesday. I want to say this plainly and then not dress it in the language of circumstance, because I have spent 50 years dressing it in the language of circumstance, and I am done with that now. Clara was unwell with a head cold. George needed help with an inventory problem at the grain office. The Tuesday passed. I told myself I would go Thursday. Thursday came, and George's mother arrived from Dresden unexpectedly, as she periodically did, and required supper and the preparation of the spare room. And the Thursday passed. The following Tuesday I could have gone. There was no obstacle. I chose not to go because the 2 missed visits had accumulated into a weight of awkwardness. Absurd, I know, given what was between us. But this is the truth of how anxiety operates. It makes the simple thing feel enormous. And I told myself I would write instead. And then I did not write. And another Thursday came and went. And then it was the 2nd week of April, and I received word from Mrs. Hatcher, whose husband owned the dry goods store below Vivienne's rooms, that something had happened, that they had found her, that I should know, because everyone was being told. That is how I learned. From Eliza Hatcher at the gate of my front yard on a Tuesday morning in April 1882, with the spring mud still soft beneath us and a pair of cardinals making an extraordinary racket in the elm tree overhead, because the world does not adjust its atmosphere to the appropriate gravity of its events. The cardinal sang. The mud was soft. Eliza Hatch's face held the particular expression of a person delivering news they have been designated to deliver and are not glad of. She had been found on the Sunday morning by the girl who came to build her fire. This is the part I will not linger in, because it is the part that is not mine to linger in. It belongs to Vivienne, to her privacy, to the terms of a decision I was not party to and do not claim to fully understand. What I will say is that it had been several days that the girl who found her was 14 years old, and that I have thought about that girl whose name was Ruth Peoples with a specific and persistent guilt for 46 years, that the sheet music from Cleveland was on the piano, that the list was on the inside of the cupboard door. The county coroner recorded the cause. The county clerk entered it in the ledger. Reverend Ansel Flood was informed. The machinery of official determination moved, as such machinery does, with the combination of efficiency and total indifference to the specific weight of the specific person to whom it was being applied. I went to see Reverend Flood on the Wednesday. I told George I was visiting my mother, which was a version of a lie I would practice until it became almost biological. I sat across from Flood in his study, which smelled of the particular dry dustiness of theological books kept in an unventilated room. And I made the case for Vivienne being buried in the churchyard with the directness of a woman who understood she was losing before she began and intended to lose with her argument fully stated. Flood listened. He was a tall man, thin in the way of men who forget to eat when they are working, with a beard that was beginning to go gray at the edges, and hands that he kept very still when he was thinking, folded on the desk before him, motionless. He listened to everything I said. He did not interrupt. He had the pastoral courtesy to look genuinely pained. Then he explained what I already knew. The covenant, the consecrated ground, the absence of pastoral discretion in cases of this nature under the standing doctrine of the Church. He said it carefully, and he said it as if he were also arguing against it internally, and he said it knowing that the argument was already settled by a century of ecclesiastical precedent that neither of us had the power to overturn in a Wednesday afternoon meeting in his study in Newcomerstown, Ohio. I said, she was 31 years old, and she had a list of things she intended to do this month. He said he was sorry. I said, I know you are. It doesn't help her. He said, no, it doesn't. That was the end of the meeting. It was the most honest conversation I have ever had with a minister, and it accomplished nothing. And I have respected Ansel Flood for it ever since, in the way you respect a person who tells you the truth about their own powerlessness without pretending to a power they do not have. Now I will tell you the true subject of this dictation. I went back to her rooms before the landlord cleared them. This was the Friday, 2 days after Flood, 4 days after Eliza Hatcher at the gate. I told George it does not matter what I told George. I went. The rooms were as they were. Nobody had touched anything. The girl who found her had run for help, and help had come, and the formal business had been conducted, and then the rooms had been shut and left, and they had the particular suspended quality of a place from which the organizing principle has been suddenly removed. Everything in exactly the right position, because she had put it there and there was no longer anyone to move it. I stood in the kitchen first. The list was on the inside of the cupboard door. I opened the door and read it. I will not recite every item. They are hers, not mine to recite. But I will tell you that the third item from the bottom was crossed off, and that the item was write to R. She had written to R sometime in those 4 weeks when I was not visiting, when I was telling myself I would go Tuesday, I would go Thursday. She had crossed that item off the list. I stood at the cupboard door for a long time. Then I went to the bedroom, and I looked under the bed, and the letter box was there. I opened it. The letters from her sister were there, bundled with a piece of string, perhaps 30 of them, over 4 years. On top of the bundle was the piece of paper folded once with my name on it. Eleanor, not Eleanor Marsh, not Mrs. Marsh, just Eleanor, in her handwriting, which was the careful, slightly forward-leaning script of someone who had been well taught and had then developed her own refinements on what she was taught. I took the paper with my name on it. I took the sheet music from the piano. I looked at the landscape print on the wall, the European river and the hills, and I did not take it because it was too large to conceal, and I was already constructing, even in that room, even in that hour, the architecture of concealment that I would maintain for the next 50 years. I looked at it for a long time instead. Then I did the thing that is the true subject of this dictation. I went to the box of letters. I took the bundle from her sister. I untied the string, and I found the most recent letter, which was dated the 14th of March, 9 days before the last Thursday, 9 days before the hand on the glass and the word yes, and I read it. The sister's name was Marguerite. I told you I would give you the name when it was time. Marguerite's letter was 3 pages in a handwriting entirely unlike Vivienne's rounded, hurried, the pen pressing harder at the ends of words. I will not recite the whole of it. I will tell you what it contained that is relevant to the true subject, which is this. Marguerite had been writing to Vivienne for 2 months with increasing urgency about what she called Vivienne's state of mind. And the letter of the 14th was the 3rd letter in that sequence. And it was not a subtle letter. It said, plainly, that she was frightened. It said she had begged Vivienne to come to Pittsburgh or to allow her to come to Newcomerstown. It said she did not know what Vivienne would do, and the not knowing was making her ill. I read that letter on a Friday in April of 1882, standing in a dead woman's bedroom, and I understood 2 things simultaneously. The first thing was that Marguerite had known something I had not known, or had not let myself know, during those 4 weeks. That the quietness of the last Thursday had a name, and the name had been available to me if I had been willing to stand still long enough to say it. The second thing was that Vivienne had written to R in those 4 weeks. She had crossed it off the list. She had written to her sister, and I do not know what she said in that letter, because I did not find it in the room, and Marguerite has never, but I am moving ahead of myself. What I understood standing in that room was the thing I have been building toward for 2 chapters and 46 years of Sunday afternoons. I had known, not the full shape of it. I will not give myself less credit than I deserve or more. But I had known something was wrong on the last Thursday, and I had named it quietness and carried it like a stone in my shoe for 3 days, and then set it down, and then not visited on the Tuesday, and not visited on the Thursday, and written no letter, and sent no word, because visiting and writing and sending word would have required me to ask the question directly, and asking the question directly would have required me to be, in some visible and unambiguous way, the person who would ask such a question of Vivienne Cook. And being that person, visibly in Newcomerstown, Ohio, in the winter of 1882, would have cost me my marriage, my daughter, my position in the only community I had ever known. So I had set the stone down, and I had gone home, and I had helped George's mother prepare the spare room, and I had written a letter to my sister in Zanesville, and Vivienne Cook had remained above her dry goods store and crossed items off her list and written to R and placed my name on a piece of paper on top of the letterbox, folded once, and waited in whatever way a person waits at the end of things. And I had not come. That is the true subject. I have said it. I am going to sit with having said it for a moment before I continue, because I have not said it out loud in 46 years, and the saying of it is not a relief. Relief is the wrong word, and I have spent this entire dictation trying to use the right words. It is an arrival. After a very long journey, it is simply an arrival. I arranged the burial. I say arranged, which is a dignified word for what was actually a negotiation with the county about an unclaimed body and the cost of a plot in the unconsecrated section, and whether anyone would be present at the interment, which the county man seemed uncertain about, and I clarified by being present myself, alone, on a cold April morning, with the clay-heavy soil opened up in the northeast corner, where the ground rises slightly, standing far enough back that I could not be accused of claiming anything publicly, and close enough that she would know that I would know that someone was there. The county man read nothing. There was no reading. There was the sound of the earth receiving what the earth receives, and the specific sound the clay soil made when it was disturbed, a sound that has no clean description, but that I have heard in my sleep for 46 years. Dense, reluctant, as though the ground itself required convincing. I went home. I told George I had been at my mother's. The following Sunday I went back, and the Sunday after that, and every Sunday since, that I have been capable of making the journey for 50 years, with flowers when the season allows, and sprigs of evergreen in winter, and the particular quality of attention that is all I have ever had to offer, and which I have offered without interruption for half a century, because it was the only form of being present that remained available to me, and I had learned, at considerable cost, what absence does. Marguerite wrote to me once, in 1884, "I will tell you what she said and what I said back, and what happened after, but I want you to understand, before you hear it, that her letter was not what I deserved, and yet it was what she sent." Marguerite's letter arrived on a Wednesday in October of 1884. I know it was a Wednesday because George was in Coshocton at the grain exchange on Wednesdays, which meant I was alone in the house from 7 in the morning until supper time, which meant I had the hours between Clara leaving for school and Clara returning from school to read and reread a letter in private without managing my face for anyone. I have thought since then about whether Marguerite knew this, whether Vivienne had told her the shape of my week in enough detail that she timed the letter deliberately. I do not know. I have never been able to decide, and the not deciding is one of the small, unresolved things I have carried alongside the larger unresolved things. The way you carry a pebble in the same pocket as a stone. The letter was 2 years and 6 months after the burial. I had thought about Marguerite in those 2.5 years with the particular frequency of a person thinking about something they have no means to address. I knew her name. I knew her handwriting from the bundle of letters in the box under the bed. I knew the city she wrote from. I did not know her surname because Vivienne had never told me, and I had not thought to look at the return addresses on the envelopes in the box. I had been reading the 14th of March letter and managing my own condition, and I had not thought ahead to the moment when I might need to contact her, because in that moment, the needing to contact her was not the problem I was trying to solve. She found me. I do not know how. I have a theory, which I will give you, but I want to be clear that it is a theory and not a confirmed fact, because I am trying to maintain the discipline of accuracy in this dictation. And the discipline of accuracy requires me to distinguish between what I know and what I have concluded. My theory is that Vivienne told her about me in the letter she wrote in late March of 1882, the letter that crossed the item off the list, the letter to R. If Vivienne wrote to her sister in those final weeks and said anything about the shape of her life in Newcomer's Town, she may have said enough for Marguerite to construct a search. A woman named Eleanor in a small Ohio town, wife of a man in the grain business. This is not a great quantity of information, but it is sufficient information if you are determined, and if you write to the right county clerk and ask the right question about a burial in April of 1882 and who was present. The county man would have remembered me. I was the only person there. The letter was 4 pages. I am going to tell you what it contained, because it is part of the accounting and because Marguerite deserves to be in this record as herself, not as a category, not as the sister or the surviving family, but as the specific person she was, which I came to know partially through this letter and the ones that followed it. She began by saying she had located me through considerable effort and that she hoped I would forgive the intrusion, which was the formal courtesy of someone who had decided to write, regardless of whether the intrusion would be forgiven, and was simply acknowledging that she knew she was intruding. I found this honest, and I respected it immediately. She said she had received a letter from Vivienne in late March or early April of 1882. She was not precise about the date, and I have wondered if the imprecision was protective or genuine, and that the letter had frightened her badly enough that she had made arrangements to travel to Newcomer's Town, and that she had arrived on a Thursday in April to find that she was 4 days too late, and that the county man she spoke to had told her that a woman had been present at the burial and that he did not know the woman's name. She had spent 2 years finding me. I want that to sit in this room for a moment. 2 years, because she needed to know who had stood at her sister's grave, because knowing mattered to her in a way that the not knowing had made unbearable. She wrote, "I do not know what you were to her. I know that you were something," because she wrote your name in a way that people only write names that mean something. I am not writing to demand explanation. I am writing because I have been standing at a distance from the whole of this for 2 years, and I think you have been standing there too, and I thought it might be less cold if we knew the other one was standing there. I read that sentence 6 times on the Wednesday morning, with the house empty around me and the October light coming through the kitchen window at a low, flat angle. And I will tell you plainly that I sat at the kitchen table for a period I cannot accurately estimate, and did nothing but read it again and again because it was the first time in 2.5 years that any other living person had acknowledged, in language that meant what it said, that there was a there to stand at, that something had existed that could be stood at a distance from, that the thing I had been keeping in secret and visiting on Sunday afternoons was real in a way that another person could see and name. I had not known how much I needed that until she gave it to me. She asked 2 questions. I will give them to you as she gave them, because her language was precise and I want to honor that precision. The first question was she very alone at the end, or had she people around her? The second question was, did she seem in the time before like someone who had decided, or like someone who was still deciding? I have thought about those 2 questions for 44 years. I think they are the 2 most honest questions I have ever been asked. And I think Marguerite Cook, I learned her surname from the return address on the envelope, which told me she had not married or had not taken a husband's name, which in 1884 was itself a piece of information. I think Marguerite had spent 2 years distilling her grief down to its essential questions with the same rigor that her sister had applied to everything she did. They had that in common. The rigor, the refusal to be approximate when precision was available. I wrote back on the Thursday. George went to Coshocton every Wednesday. I had until Thursday evening to have the letter written and posted before he came home. And I used most of Thursday to write 4 pages that I reduced to 2 before I sent them, because the original 4 contained things I was not ready to put in an envelope and release into the postal system of 1884, where anyone with sufficient authority and curiosity could intercept and read them. To her first question, I said, she had people, and I was one of them, and I am sorry I was not one of them at the end, and I intend to say more about that when I have better words for it, which I may never have. To her second question, I said, I did not know. I said it honestly, and I said it with the full weight of what that not knowing cost me to admit. I had seen the quietness, and I had not asked. Whether what I would have found if I had asked was a decision already made or a decision still forming, I could not tell her, because I did not know, and I was not going to construct a comfort from my ignorance. She wrote back in November. We wrote to each other for 11 years. I want to tell you about the letters, because the letters are part of what happened to me after the grave, and what happened to me after the grave is part of what the grave has been, which is not only a place of grief, but also, this is harder to say, a place of something that is not its opposite, but sits adjacent to it. Marguerite was a school teacher in Pittsburgh, which I had not known about Vivienne's family. And she had been teaching since she was 19. And she wrote about her students with the precise affection of someone who took children seriously as people rather than as projects. She was funny in her letters in a way that surprised me each time, a dry, observational humor delivered without announcement, sitting inside otherwise serious paragraphs like a small, unexpected window. She had her sister's quality of directness without her sister's quality of reserve. Where Vivienne had been a room with carefully placed objects and one closed door, Marguerite was a room with the windows open. She never asked me again about the nature of my relationship with Vivienne. She had asked once, obliquely, in the first letter, and I had answered obliquely, and she received my obliqueness without pressing it, and we moved forward. I do not know if she knew precisely. I think she knew sufficiently, and sufficiently was what the situation required, and what we both had the sense to accept. What she gave me over 11 years of letters was witness. She had known Vivienne her whole life. She knew the childhood I had not been present for. The years in Pennsylvania I had only received in fragments. The particular history of how Vivienne had come to be the kind of person who kept lists and played the violin privately and pressed her hand against cold glass and built her life with the careful precision of someone who knew that lives could come apart and was constructing hers to be resistant to coming apart, and did it anyway, in the end, in a way she chose. To know the fuller shape of someone you have loved and lost, to receive it in installments over 11 years from the person who loved her first and longest, is a gift I did not know how to ask for and received without deserving. I tried to give back what I could. I told Marguerite about the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I told her about the rooms and the list and the landscape print and the rosin smell and the third stair that I stepped to the left of. I told her about the Sunday visits, the flowers, the corner where the ground rises slightly. I did not tell her about the 4 weeks, not in 11 years, of letters that I kept for this room, for Alice's composition book, for the record that is supposed to be accurate. The letters stopped in 1895, not because of any rupture between us. Marguerite became ill in the late spring of that year. She wrote me one letter that mentioned it without dwelling on it, with the same quality of not dwelling that I recognized from her sister's handling of difficult things. And then the letters stopped coming, and I wrote twice more into the silence before I understood that the silence was permanent. I did not know how to find out for certain. I could not write to Pittsburgh and ask after a woman I had no official connection to, no relationship that I could name in a letter to a stranger. I wrote once to the school where she taught and received a letter back from an administrator that confirmed, in the careful language of official communication, that Miss Cook was no longer in the employ of the district and that they could not provide additional information. Miss Cook was no longer in the employ of the district. I held that letter in the same kitchen where I had read the first letter from Pittsburgh in the same October light. It happened to be autumn again, which was not symbolism but coincidence. And I noted only because the light made the letter very easy to read, every word completely clear. I went to the grave that Sunday, and I told Vivienne that her sister was gone. I said it the way I said most things at the grave, which was plainly and without theater, because she had never had patience for theater, and I had learned that from her and kept it. I said, Marguerite is gone. I said, she was good to me for 11 years. I said, I think you knew she would be. The elm trees at the edge of the section were in their full October color, which in that part of Ohio runs to deep gold before it goes to brown, and the light through them had a specific quality, dense and amber and slightly particulate, as though the light itself had weight that I have noticed every October since at that corner of the ground. And that has become, over 30-some years, the way I know it is time to bring the evergreen sprigs and put the flowers away until spring. Clara found out in 1906. I want to put this in the correct chapter because it belongs here, in the chapter about what the keeping cost, rather than in the final chapter where I am going to try to say true things about the present, which is a different kind of accounting. She was 36 years old. She had married a man named Denton from Coshocton and had 2 children of her own, and had not lived in the house since 1893, and she came to visit on a Sunday in July of 1906 and arrived early and found me not home and waited on the porch. And when I came back down the lane with the particular posture of a person who has been somewhere that requires no concealment and therefore has not bothered to construct any, she looked at me for a moment. My daughter, who has my eyes and George's practical intelligence and some combination of both of our stubborn quietness. And she said, "Where do you go on Sundays, Mother?" Not a question. Clara has never used the rising inflection of a question when she means a statement. It is one of the things I have always admired about her, and it is, in this instance, the reason I told her the truth. Not all of the truth, enough of the truth. I told her about Vivienne. I told her about the grave. I told her about the Sunday visits. I told her in the kitchen with the July light coming through the window and the 2 of us sitting across from each other at the same table where I had read Marguerite's first letter. And Clara listened the way she has always listened, which is completely and without interruption, and with her hands very still on the table. And when I was finished, she sat for a moment in the quality of quiet that follows something significant being said. Then she said, "Does Father know?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you going to tell him?" I said, "I did not know." George was 62 years old and in good health, and we had been married for 33 years, and I genuinely did not know. Clara looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at me with the direct, slightly unsettling attention of someone who has just recalibrated their understanding of their entire childhood and is choosing, deliberately, not to make that recalibration the other person's problem. She said, "I think you should keep going on Sundays." That was all she said about it. We have not spoken of it since, directly, in 18 years, though I believe I know, in the way you know things about your children, that they have not told you that she has been to the grave herself. Alone, once, at least, I have not asked. Some forms of knowing do not require confirmation. George died in 1921. He died in September, in the house, in the bed we had shared for 49 years, with Clara and Denton in the house and the doctor come and gone, and nothing dramatic or sudden in the manner of it, simply the body's long negotiation with its own limits arriving at its conclusion. He was a good man. I want that in this record, as clearly as everything else is in this record, because the truth of what I have told you does not undo the truth of that, and I am not willing to let the one cancel the other, because cancellation is the laziest form of accounting, and I have been trying to be accurate. I sat with him at the end, and I held his hand, which was large and dry, and still had the specific callus pattern of 40 years of grain work along the base of his fingers. And I was entirely present with him, and entirely honest in the presence I offered, which is the most I know how to say about it. He did not know about the Sundays. He died not knowing. I have made my peace with both of those facts by arriving, after many years, at the understanding that they are not in contradiction, that you can love 2 people across a lifetime without one love being the lie of the other, and that the lie was in the concealment, not in the feeling, and that the concealment was something I did to survive in the particular time and place I was given, and that survival, while not a complete moral defense, is at least an honest one. I go to the grave on Sundays still, 78 years old, and I go The piece of paper with my name on it, Eleanor, folded once, I have kept inside the sheet music from Cleveland for 46 years, which means her handwriting has been inside the notes she never played, and I have never decided whether that is the kind of thing she would have found meaningful or the kind of thing she would have found sentimental. And the fact that I still do not know, after 50 years, is either the proof that I did not know her well enough or the proof that I knew her well enough to know she contained both possibilities simultaneously. It is a Thursday morning in the spring of 1928. Alice is across from me with a fresh page open, her pen ready, the same careful attention she has held throughout this entire dictation. I asked her at the beginning to withhold her responses until I was finished. She has done that without complaint for 4 chapters. That kind of discipline deserves acknowledgement before anything else gets said. Alice, you have been a good listener. That is rarer than the people who possess it understand. I am 79 years old. I said 78 at the beginning, which was accurate then. I had not yet had my January birthday. I have had it now. The correction is minor, but accuracy is the only discipline I have imposed on this record, and I will not abandon it on the final page. The grave, as it stands in the spring of 1928, the iron fence at the eastern edge of Elmwood still leans where a snowfall in 1923 pushed 2 posts inward, and nobody in any official capacity has seen fit to correct this, which is consistent with the attention historically paid to the unconsecrated section. The gate still does not latch. The grass is kept now by a boy named Daniel Foss, no relation to anyone in this story whom I pay 40 cents a week and who has learned to do what I specify without asking why I specify it. The northeast corner is unchanged. The soil is still clay heavy. In wet Aprils, it holds water longer than the rest of the section, and the ground has a specific density when you press your foot against it resistant, giving only incrementally the way certain kinds of sorrow give. I have visited in every season Ohio produces, including 3 winters I would not recommend. I visited through the influenza year, riding in a neighbor's wagon because my legs would not carry me and I would not stay away. I visited through George's death, through the loss of Clara's eldest child, through Marguerite's silence becoming permanent. The grave has no stone. I have thought about this for 50 years. She did not need my stone. She needed me to come. I came, and the coming is the marker invisible to everyone but Clara, and Daniel Foss, who does not know what he maintains, and now Alice, who does. That will have to be sufficient. I believe it is. Clara came in February with soup I did not need, and accepted anyway, because the offering of soup is a form of love that does not require naming. We sat at this table, and she said, "Are you going to tell it?" She meant this dictation. I said yes. I said some of it would be difficult to hear. She said, "I know what you didn't do in those 4 weeks. I've known for a long time. 50 years of Sundays is a payment. It doesn't settle the account, but it's a payment." I said, "I'm not sure that's for you to say." She said, "No, but I wanted you to have heard it out loud first from someone who is still here. I have not resolved whether she is right. I have been glad every day since that she said it." Marguerite sent me Vivienne's final letter in 1891. It arrived with no covering note, only Marguerite's handwriting on the back of the envelope. "You should have this more than I should. I have read it twice, once when it arrived, once in February, the week after Clara brought the soup. I will not read it again. It is complete, and complete things do not require repeated return. She wrote about Newcomer's Town, about the rooms, the students, the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, about Ohio's winter light, which she found severe but honest. She wrote about her state of mind plainly, that she was tired in a way sleep did not address, that she had felt it before in Pennsylvania and moved to outrun it, and now understood it had followed her. And then she wrote this, which I am putting into this dictation because it is the thing I needed most and could not receive until I had spent 46 years building the capacity to hold it. Eleanor has been a great gift. Whatever comes next, the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons have been real, and I have been genuinely present in them. I did not expect to find anyone. I found someone. The finding matters even if I cannot stay. I have lived with that sentence for 37 years. It has not answered every question. It has not resolved the 4 weeks or the absent stone or the county clerk's ledger entry. But it has been present alongside all of those things, the way a source of warmth sits alongside cold without eliminating it, simply existing, simply refusing to be untrue. I was found. She said so. In her own hand, to her sister, in the last letter she wrote. Vivienne's landscape print, the European river, the hills, the frame, slightly too large. The paper mat she cut and fitted herself ended up on the wall of Hatcher's dry goods store after the landlord cleared her rooms. Eliza Hatcher bought it because she thought it was pretty and her back room needed something. I did not know this for 3 years. When I found out, I went and stood in that back room and looked at it on the wall where Eliza had hung it, slightly crooked, and I left it there because taking it would have required explaining why I wanted it, and I was not prepared to explain. I looked at it every time I entered that store for 17 years. When Eliza died and her son William dispersed the contents, he brought the print to my door wrapped in brown paper. He said his mother had liked it, and he thought I might want it. He said it carefully, with his eyes slightly averted, in the way of a person doing a courtesy that does not name itself, because the naming would cost more than the doing. It is on the wall of this room. It has been there 29 years. It is slightly crooked. I leave it that way. I am going to the grave on Sunday. Daniel Foss will clear the winter debris from the northeast corner and leave me alone there, which he does now without being asked. I will bring the small yellow wildflowers that are beginning along the lane. She would have noticed them, named them, because she noticed what most people walk past and understood that walking past things was a choice with a cost. What I say at the grave is not a request. It has never been a request. It is a report, a continuing report, updated weekly on a world she left before she was finished with it. Clara's grandchildren. The elm trees in October. The price of spring wheat, which I include because George reported it every supper for 49 years. And it seems, at this distance, like something worth preserving, even in translation. She had a list on the inside of a cupboard door. A list is a form of intention. Intention means you were planning to remain. Someone should be keeping the account of what she would have seen if she had. I have kept it. For 50 years, I have kept it. In the sheet music from Cleveland, inside the front cover, there is a piece of paper folded once. It has been there for 46 years. The paper is fragile now, I can feel. When I open the cover carefully, the delicacy of something folded for a very long time, the crease having become its natural position. I do not unfold it anymore. I know what it says. Eleanor, folded once. Inside the music she never played. The landscape print has no opinion of what I have told you. I envy it.
In conclusion, Eleanor Ruth Marsh died shortly after this recording was made, and per her final request, she was buried in the churchyard she had bypassed every Sunday for half a century. While the story and this circular, haunting recording from 1928 are authentic, the visuals were created using AI to help tell the story of a loyalty that outlasted its own era. If Eleanor's secret moved you, please subscribe and share your opinion in the comments. Do you believe some secrets are better kept in the dark, or was her confession the only way to finally lay the past to rest?